The stone floor of the east wing did not just slope, it was designed to carry away what the walls were meant to hide. On the night of December 30, 1610, the air inside Csejte Castle was thick with the scent of iron and cold, damp earth. When the soldiers broke through the silence of that winter night, they did not find a noble estate. They found a slaughterhouse. This is not a ghost story. It is a record of what happens when power assumes it is invisible, and a crime so vast it took 4 centuries for the world to stop looking away. The soldiers moved with heavy, measured steps. They were not here for a social call. They were led by Georgi Thurzo, the Palatine of Hungary, a man who understood that in the high-stakes politics of 17th century Europe, an arrest had to be perfect to be permanent. The castle was dark, a jagged silhouette against the frozen Hungarian landscape. It was built for isolation. The east wing extended out over a treacherous rock formation, a place where screams could be swallowed by the wind before they ever reached the village below. Thurzo's men knew the layout, but nothing prepared them for what lay behind the heavy oak doors of the lower chambers. They found a room fitted with iron rings bolted into the cold stone walls. The floor was sloped, a deliberate, architectural choice. It was engineered to drain liquids toward a central point. There, in the dim light of torches, they found Anna. She was alive, but she was a fragment of a person. Her arms had been carved with precision, a series of deliberate cuts that spoke of something far more calculated than a sudden burst of rage. Her fingernails were gone. She had been held in that dark, sloping room for an unknown duration, a guest of a woman who viewed the human body as a resource to be dismantled. Anna was not the only discovery that night. Behind a wall in the same desolate wing, soldiers moved a heavy stone and revealed the remains of another girl. She had been dead for some time. There was no dignity left in the discovery, only the raw, biological reality of a life ended in secret. Further down, in a hidden chamber that appeared on no official inventory of the castle, the temperature was low enough that the body of a third girl had been preserved by the natural cold of the mountain. Her family would eventually be able to identify her, a final, grim confirmation of a fate that many had suspected but none had dared to name. The castle was not a home, it was a machine. It relied on the silence of the village, the isolation of the mountain, and the weight of a name that made asking questions a dangerous gamble. Thurzo stood in the middle of the room, the flickering torchlight catching the cold, damp walls. He had come to dismantle a legacy. He had come to arrest a countess. He did not yet know that the evidence he was walking through was merely the surface of a much deeper, more systemic rot. The room with the iron rings was the starting point, but the path to what lay beneath would take years to uncover. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe and share to support the channel. The woman Thurzo came to arrest was not hiding in the shadows. She was Countess Elizabeth, one of the most powerful noblewomen in Central Europe. At 50 years old, she was a figure of immense political gravity, the cousin of the Prince of Transylvania, the niece of a former king of Poland, and a widow who had managed 12,000 acres of land with a precision that bordered on the obsessive. To understand the scale of what happened at Csejte, one must understand the social armor she wore. She was not a reclusive figure from folklore, she was an administrator. She managed estates, spoke 4 languages, and occupied a rank so lofty that the local authorities were conditioned to look anywhere but at her. For 8 years she had operated within these castle walls, and for 8 years the world had allowed it. The mechanism that enabled her actions was not just violence. It was the specific vulnerability of her victims. She did not target those who had the power to demand a search or an audit. She targeted the daughters of impoverished families and the servant girls who had no one to advocate for them. In the rigid hierarchy of 17th century Hungary, a servant was a disposable commodity. When one vanished, the village priests might note it in a burial record, but they rarely asked why a young girl, healthy only days before, had succumbed to a sudden, unspecified illness. The priests recorded these deaths with a strange, passive consistency. The countess would report the cause as cholera. The bodies were buried quickly, often in the dead of night, and usually without notifying the families until the earth had already been shoveled over the grave. The priests knew. They observed the timing. They noted the lack of traditional symptoms. And yet they kept writing. They continued to enter the names into the church books, filling page after page with the bureaucratic ledger of a growing graveyard. This was the architecture of her immunity. The silence was not born of ignorance, it was born of a calculation. The families who stopped receiving letters from their daughters certainly suspected that something had gone wrong. They did not come to check. They knew the weight of her name. They knew that an inquiry into the affairs of a woman of her stature was not merely a legal request. It was a personal risk that could invite ruin upon their own households. By 1610, the system had been running so long that it felt like an established order. Elizabeth had turned her castle into a private world where the laws of the kingdom did not apply. She was a mother, a widow, and a pillar of the Protestant nobility, and she had built a wall of social deference so thick that even the missing girls could not penetrate it. Thurzo's arrival was the first time that wall had been breached. He was not just arresting a woman. He was challenging a silence that had held the entire region in its grip for nearly a decade. The Gymnasium at Csejte was not, by any official definition, a place of confinement. It was marketed as a finishing school. It was a place where daughters of lesser noble families were sent to learn the necessary arts of the era. Music, dancing, complex needlework, and the delicate management of a vast household. To the families of these girls, the Countess's offer was not a threat, it was an opportunity. To be taken under the wing of a woman of such high political standing was a mark of prestige, a ladder that their daughters could climb to secure better marriages and higher social standing. The arrangement was standard practice among the Hungarian nobility. It was a system built on trust and the assumption of protection. For years, the families considered it a privilege to have their daughters serve in the Countess's household. They did not see the iron rings on the walls. They did not see the rooms converted for purposes that never appeared in any inventory. They saw the prestige of the Bathory name and the promise of a future. Then the pattern shifted. The deaths that had once been limited to the servant class began to bleed into this new demographic. A girl would arrive for her education and within months she would be dead. The Countess followed the same procedural rhythm. Report a sudden, convenient cause of death, bury the body in the dark, and notify the family only when the trail had gone cold. The staff within the castle walls were not all perpetrators, but they were all witnesses. A woman named Ilona Jo, who had served the household since the Countess's own children were infants, knew exactly what was happening behind the heavy doors. She had been their wet nurse, she knew the secrets of every room. She said nothing. Her silence was a survival strategy. To speak was to become the next subject of the system, and so she kept her head down, managed the accounts, and performed her duties. The priests were the most damning observers. They were the ones who kept the records. They noted that cholera does not leave marks on the skin, yet they continued to record the cause of death as such. They did not question the discrepancies in the dates, the frequency of the burials, or the strange, hurried nature of the rites. They were tethered to the power of the house. They understood that the ledger of the dead was a document that needed to be kept clean of controversy. This was the pivot point. As long as she stayed within the boundaries of the servant class, the Countess could argue that her actions were merely a private matter of household management. But by bringing the daughters of the lesser nobility into the cycle, she had miscalculated. She had introduced an element of danger for families who, while lower in rank, still possessed the capacity to wonder, to notice, and eventually to ask. The silence was beginning to fray at the edges, stretched thin by the weight of names that were suddenly no longer invisible. 6 years before Anna was found in that sloping room, the silence finally fractured. A Lutheran minister named István Magyari stood before his congregation in the year 1604, his hands visibly shaking as he clutched a document he had drafted for the Habsburg court in Vienna. He did not call the Countess evil. He called her inhuman. It was a precise, legalistic, and terrifying term to use in a formal petition. Magyari understood the risk. He was a minister, a man of God, but he was also a man who had heard the whispers that traveled from the village to the pulpit. He named the victims, servant girls and the daughters of families too poor to demand answers. He knew that by filing this petition with the highest authority in the kingdom, he was effectively signing his own death warrant. The parish clerks who watched him read the words noted the tremor in his fingers, not from religious fervor, but from the raw, cold fear of a man standing against a monolith. He would be dead within a year. The petition itself, however, survived. It reached Vienna, where it sat in a stack of administrative paperwork, unanswered for 6 long years. The bureaucracy of the empire was not interested in the disappearance of peasant girls. It was interested in land, in taxes, and in the delicate political alliances that kept the peace. Magyari's plea for justice was deemed an inconvenience, a nuisance that could be filed away and ignored. The indifference of the court was the Countess's greatest ally. She continued her work, emboldened by the fact that even a formal accusation from a respected minister could not penetrate the administrative shield of the Habsburgs. She saw the world as a place governed by the weight of names and the convenience of silence. If a minister could be ignored, who else was there to fear? But something shifted in 1609. A girl arrived at the castle who had connections the Countess had not accounted for. This time, the questions did not come from a lone, vulnerable priest. They came from a network of people who started looking for answers that could not be deflected with a single word or a bribe. For the first time, the finishing school faced an investigation that the local authorities could not simply bury with the bodies. The minister's petition had been a seed, but it took years for the soil to turn. The reality was that the investigation into the Countess was never just about morality. It was about the slow, inevitable collapse of the defenses she had built. The system that allowed her to act with such impunity was being dismantled from within, not by a sudden moral awakening, but by the accumulation of enough voices that the authorities could no longer pretend they were deaf. By December 1610, Georgi Thurzo had accumulated enough administrative leverage to move against the castle. He did not wait for the winter to break. On the night of December 30th, he arrived at Csejte Castle accompanied by a small company of heavily armed soldiers. They moved quickly, entering the estate without a formal warning. What happened in the moments immediately following their entry remains one of the most significant contradictions in the historical record. If you examine the documents left behind, you do not find a single, clean narrative. You find 2 completely different versions of the exact same night, both written by the same man. The first version appears in a private letter Thurzo wrote to his wife, Zober Erzsébet, on the very night of the arrest. In this personal account, the scene he describes is raw and theatrical. He claims that he caught the Countess in the middle of a brutal act. He wrote that his men discovered her in a chamber, surrounded by victims, with one young girl already dead on the floor and another chained to a stone wall, bleeding from fresh wounds. This is the image that history preferred. The monster caught in the act, the sudden interruption of a horror sequence. The second version is the official arrest record. This document was filed with the royal court the following week. It was a formal legal text meant to stand as the official state narrative. In this account, the theatrical horror disappears completely. The document states that when Thurzo and his soldiers entered the main living quarters, they found the Countess seated calmly at a dinner table. She was entertaining guests. She was not in the East Wing. She was not covered in blood. She was separated from the basement chambers by layers of stone and social propriety. Thurzo never explained why his private letters and his official state documents described 2 entirely different realities. One of them was a fabrication. In the high-stakes world of Hungarian nobility, an investigator often needed to create a narrative that justified the immediate, armed arrest of a person who outranked almost everyone else in the region. The investigation did not stop with the Countess. It quickly focused on the mechanics of her household. The testimonies collected over the following months revealed that Elizabeth did not operate in a vacuum. She had built a highly efficient network of accomplices, each with a specific procedural role. Dorothea Sentes was identified by multiple witnesses not as a leader, but as a direct instrument. She carried out the physical instructions with a mechanical detachedness. Ilona Jo managed the internal spaces of the house, using her long-standing authority as a former wet nurse to control the movement of the servants. János Ujjeri, a young male servant, handled the logistics of disposal, ensuring that the evidence vanished into the frozen earth or the hidden crevices of the mountain. Finally, there was Ertzi Majorova. Her role was perhaps the most critical. According to the trial records, she was the one who noticed that the supply of local servant girls was running low because the village families were becoming suspicious. She gave the Countess a piece of advice that would ultimately destroy the entire operation: stop taking peasants and start recruiting the daughters of the lesser nobility under the guise of education. The methods these accomplices described were not the theatrical, blood-soaked rituals of later legends. They described a bleak, procedural cruelty. It was a system based on starvation over weeks, prolonged exposure to the freezing winter air, and confinement in spaces so narrow that the victims could neither stand upright nor lie down. It was a bureaucracy of torment, organized by a noblewoman and executed by servants who believed their compliance was the only thing keeping them alive. The trials began in January 1611, held in the town of Bitka. The political anatomy of these proceedings is a masterclass in calculated interest. King Matyas, the sovereign of the kingdom, owed the Bathory dynasty family a massive financial debt, a burden inherited from his predecessor. The moment the Countess was arrested, that debt suddenly became unenforceable. It was later wiped from the books entirely as a negotiated condition of her confinement. The timing was not a coincidence. It was a settlement disguised as judicial action. Thurzo's own motives were layered with the same cold, administrative pragmatism. As the guardian of the Countess's minor son, Paul, Thurzo was positioned to assume control over the vast Bathory estates if the mother were permanently removed from the picture. He was, effectively, the investigator, the judge, and the primary beneficiary of the outcome. His private letter on the night of the arrest, the one describing the discovery of a body on the floor, begins to look less like a report of a crime and more like the construction of a necessary justification for a power grab. The trials themselves were not a search for truth, but a confirmation of a predetermined end. The accomplices were convicted and subjected to brutal, public executions. Dorothea Sentis and Ilona Joe had their fingers torn away with red-hot pincers before being burned alive at the stake. Janos Ujeri was beheaded. Through it all, the Countess never stepped into a courtroom. She never stood before a judge. She never testified. The most haunting piece of evidence, the small leather-bound book in which she recorded her household accounts in her own handwriting, was never entered into the court records. It was the only item that could have proven the scale of the horror, yet it vanished. A servant named Susanna claimed during the trial that a court official had told her he saw a list in that book containing over 650 names. This figure, 650, became the bedrock of the legend, the number that defined her in history books for centuries. But the official who supposedly saw the book never mentioned it in his own testimony. There is no proof the book ever existed. The number rests on a rumor of an object that no one else ever touched. Elizabeth spent the final 3.5 years of her life in sealed rooms within her own castle. There was no trial, no formal sentence, and no conviction. When she finally died on August 21, 1614, the village of Csejte refused to allow her burial in their churchyard. They would not permit the body of a woman they believed to be a mass murderer to lie within the site of the church where their own daughters had been baptized. Her remains were removed in secret, and in the 4 centuries since, no archaeological investigation has ever located them. The legend of the Blood Countess eventually calcified. It turned into a story of baths, myths, and Gothic horror, told by men who had never read a single original trial document. But the archives in Budapest and Bratislava hold something far more chilling than a myth. They hold the records of a system. They hold the 300 witness testimonies, the burial records, the letters, and the debt cancellation papers. The documents are real. They are dry, technical, and meticulously organized. They record a woman who managed 12,000 acres, wrote in 4 languages, and operated a facility that killed at least 30 people between 1602 and 1610. The evidence supports the political conspiracy, the financial motives, and the reality of the graves all at once. What remains is a historical void. We have the names of the victims, we have the administrative records of their deaths, and we have the physical evidence of their suffering. But the woman at the center of it remains a shadow, hidden behind 4 centuries of silence and the cold, unyielding weight of the files that describe her life. The archive is quiet now. The name remains. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.